Kennedy were on the walls, and I now live in a state where the vast majority of people are elected as Democrats and choose to serve as Republicans. That's a very troubling development.
Beacon Hill Democrats would disagree, of course. To many of them, Browdy's been a pushy ideologue, carrying water for the public employee unions who help fund his group, without regard for changing political realities. In a way, Browdy agrees.
What has to change is people have to decide what they believe in and decide that a line is to be drawn in the sand which they will never, under any circumstance, cross.
In 7 years of unflinching liberal advocacy, Browdy scored only one major political win, the 1990 defeat of the tax-slashing CLT Initiative petition.
The high point was clearly winning question 3 in 1990, defeating it, but as you know, on the same day, the guy who I've built a virtual cottage industry out of criticizing, Bill Weld, was elected, so maybe the high point and the low point came on the same day.
Was your victory on question 3 an aberration, looking back on it?
I guess you might have to say so.
Weld's election and re-election slammed the door on Browdy's tax and spend agenda, leaving him frustrated, but vowing to continue private pursuit of his goal.
The resurrection of liberalism in Massachusetts and America. I don't accept the notion that it's dead. I don't accept the notion that it's an anachronism. It's just got to be repackaged and sold relentlessly to the public.
Good luck, Jim. A good guy with a tough job. Coming up next, Browdy's Old Small Pals announcement. We've got a lot to talk about. Let's get right to it with two of the city's most astute political analysts. They are Peter Meade, the Chief Executive Officer of the New England Council. Peter, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Good to have you. And also joining us, Barbara Anderson, Executive Director, Citizens for Limited Taxation. Barbara, hi, how you doing?
Hi, John. Fine, thanks.
A rare non-mall appearance for you. You've been out getting signatures for the pay raise. How's it going?
Pay raise
repeal.
Pay raise repeal is going very well at the mall.
Come on, legislator just said she's doing what?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a fun petition by people eager to sign this petition.
Not hard to coax people into signing it.
Just we don't know how many of our members are still petitioning out there. As long as everyone shows up and petitions, we'll have the signatures, I would think.
Well, do you need, by the way?
Go ahead,
we need 65,000 by the day before Thanksgiving. They have to be turned into the city and town halls by 5 o'clock the day before Thanksgiving.
And then it'll be on the ballot next year.
Next November, and the voters will decide what they want the pay to be and how long they want them in session.
And do you know who you'll be traveling the state debating about the pay raise? Will Bill Weld be debating you in favor of the pay raise, or
well, it
Paul
depends,
Cellucci,
John.
maybe?
You know, this week you had asked him the question this past week about how he was going to feel about that pay raise if the legislature didn't perform by next week when they have to go home and they have to leave for the winter, and so we're eager to see.
With the session running out on Wednesday, I take it you don't feel they've showed that they deserve the pay raise?
Well, for those of you who weren't there at the time, what Jon Keller asked the governor at this little press availability was, Governor, if the legislature doesn't perform and actually take care of the bills that you consider a top priority, do you think they'll have earned their pay raise? And the governor kind of stuttered and stammered and said, well, ask me by Wednesday night, the 15th of November. So I assume, John, you're going to be there
Absolutely.
Wednesday night with a petition depending on him to sign if, in fact, they do not perform.
I'll be there with belts on. Peter, do you think they've earned the pay raise?
No, and I think Bill Weld's got a real problem because he was part and parcel of the pay raise. You know, they never get it right. I think most citizens wouldn't begrudge a nominal pay increase for legislators. They don't tie it to the consumer price index. I think they ought to do it prospectively, and if there's ever a pay increase, it ought to be for the next legislature coming in. But one of the things that I think is more significant than anything else in Barbara's petition is to make the legislature a 6-month legislature. I think even absent the pay raise part of it, I think most citizens would say, you know, that's not a bad idea. And aside from saying, you know, the, sort of the general thing, none of us in the history of the country have ever liked the legislative body, but I think if it's a 6-month legislature, you provide an opportunity for people to say, gee, I'm going to take 6 months off from the partnership, or to go to the boss and say, look, I've been elected to the legislature. Can I take a leave that allows me to have this finite period of time? I think you'll see a very different kind of legislature if it is for a limited amount of time.
You agree with that, Barbara?
Absolutely. 42 other states have a part-time legislature making less pay than ours, but doing more performing and doing a better job. So I think, and thank you for your support, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think the part-time part of it will be, in terms of long-term impact, a far greater one. I think you can have a pay raise business that is tied to the consumer price index, and people say, okay, you know, that's fair. Or
Once we cut their pay in half and they only work through June, then they'll get a pay raise every year based upon the growth in median family income. So if their constituents are doing well, then they get a little pay raise.
Well, now, this is going to be Dolesville if you two keep agreeing on everything.
I'd be for doubling their pay if we could get them to work only 6 months.
Let me ask this. Bill Weld is the father and mother of this pay raise. It wouldn't have happened without his complicity, without, some feel, his duplicity in wheeling and dealing and trading the pay raise for legislative favors. Let's start with you, Barbara. Is Bill Weld vulnerable to criticism when he runs for the Senate against Jon Kerry on this score?
Well, he certainly was, but it depends upon next fall. On the ballot with him will be this brand new great idea of a 6-month session, which we wouldn't even had a chance to do if Bill Weld hadn't done that pay raise. So in a way, the issue itself redeems his action, and that it helps us to really make the system work even better. And I think he can wiggle through that as long as he signs and supports the pay raise when it's on the ballot with him.
Jon Kerry voted for pay raises in Congress, did he not, Peter? How can he criticize Weld for it?
Oh, I think this is a bit different than the pay raises the Senate and the House have gotten. And I'm not sure, John, I don't know what John's record is in voting for pay raises, but this didn't pass the smell test, the vote for the state legislative pay increase. And there wasn't anybody in the State House who didn't have a considerable bit of odor on them. And I think the governor will have a hard time explaining that one. But Bill Weld has the greatest ability to be either able to say, yeah, or, you know, I made a mistake there. More than any politician I've ever seen in my life, he has the greatest ability to sort of let it roll off.
On the other hand, the governor has this great new proposal. This is his new proposal for redoing state government completely. The legislature has till next fall to act on this. If they don't do any of these great ideas, he would be entirely justified in standing up and saying, well, I guess I was wrong. I gave them a pay raise, and they didn't even do the thing that would have made our government work for the first time probably in its history.
Bill Weld wouldn't be such a political opportunist to turn around and renege on the pay raise, would he, or come out against it just for the sake of political opportunism?
No, of course not. But if the situation changes, he could certainly recognize that things have gotten worse, not better with the pay raise. His whole idea was, with the pay raise, you get a better legislature. Well, when you see how they act, if they don't deal with this, with these major reforms that I think most people will have to support, then it shows that they didn't deserve it. He made a mistake. He apologizes, Peter said, and he does that very well.
He does it better than anybody. But here's where I think Bill Weld's got a problem. You know, he's for the megaplex, and then Finneran says, Tom Finneran, the chairman of Ways and Means, says he's missing in action. You can't find him to try to lobby it. There are a number of things here. On the welfare reform, the governor was part of a welfare reform discussion in the legislature for 2 years. There was never a discussion of fingerprinting welfare recipients. I mean, it has all the smell of someone who did a poll or a focus group coming into him and saying, by the way, let's fingerprint. Bang, he's for that. The question of how much of this he's really for and really willing to fight for and try to get through the legislature is also a question for Bill Weld. It's not just a question for the legislature.
Peter, he now has sort of a reputation, as you're pointing out, for not following through, except he did follow through on general welfare reform. He's reached the point of no return now. He has to follow through on this, or he'll exacerbate an image of himself that he will not want to have if he's running against Jon Kerry next year.
You have to be a little bit skeptical, though, Barbara, aren't you? It took 5 years for this document to come coughing out of his office. Why did it have to take 5 years? I don't think it's unreasonable to expect, since his rhetoric was all about this, going back to 1989 and 90, that we should have seen this years ago.
Well, except that it took us 200 years to get the state into such a situation where it had just built up into this giant mega thing that doesn't even work anymore. He came in first. He had to deal with the debt problem with our constant tax increases. He had to get the state in order. He had to bring our bond rating up. He did a lot of other things. You know, the welfare reform is a major reform in this state. So I think the time has come now to do the complete restructuring he talked about. So the timing is perfect. If he follows through on it, it can be done now. Who cares if he didn't do it last year or the year before?
I think the
John,
public...
if he was sitting here, he'd look at you and say, John, I'm a late bloomer.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, he
better to light a candle than curse the darkness, he'd say.
I think there's also going to be some suspicion that it has got something to do with timing, that is absolutely correct, and the timing is a U.S. Senate race, much more than a study of government that went on over a 5-year period.
I must say, however, having trashed Weld, that his ace in the hole is that this is really Paul Cellucci's baby, and Cellucci really will be there and will follow through on it. Count on it.
And frankly, I think Paul Cellucci does a better job of explaining this than the governor does, because he's really done the nitty-gritty work, and he's also worked in the legislature and understands how some of these things happen. Paul does, I think, the best job of anybody of explaining how this can work and some of what difference the changes might make.
Right, so if he's following through and the governor's running for Congress, it makes a nice Senate. It makes a nice contract.
Yeah, and I think you'll see Paul Cellucci's signature all over it.
And he has plenty of incentive to make sure he follows through for his own political future. Speaking of politicians like Weld, who are very expert at least appearing to be self-effacing, probably the all-time greatest I've ever seen, Colin Powell, announced that he's not going to run for president. Barbara, surprised Angry, saddened, not surprised? What was your reaction?
I don't know. I guess the whole presidential race is sort of off my radar screen. I'm so focused on Congress. I don't think it really matters who the president is as long as we keep putting people in Congress who are ready for revolution. But I would have liked to see Colin Powell in the race. I remember the first time I saw him, the night of the Gulf War started, and I thought, wow, there's a grown-up. There's an adult. I think we would love to have an adult in the
even though
presidency
some
for a
of the
while.
conservative architects of the revolution held a press conference to say he's not with the program. If he shows up in San Diego, half the convention will walk out.
Yeah, well, who's running? Who's with the program? You know, I mean, if Gingrich isn't going to run himself, then nobody's really with the program. Gingrich can handle this. Congress can handle it if people very intelligently vote to keep that revolution going in Congress. And the president will just have to basically go along. Clinton's a better go-alonger than most people are. And Powell is sort of an amateur, or would have been sort of an amateur, so he might have been open to suggestion from the Congress.
Your
So it would have
reaction
been
to
good.
I was saddened. I was hoping he would run. I think he would have added a great deal to the race. Stephen Ambrose, the Eisenhower biographer who was trying to convince Colin Powell to run, said, and I think he's correct, people liked Powell for the same reason they liked Eisenhower. And he is the American success story. To have a guy coming out of New York, his parents were immigrants, to have been an achiever, to have done so well, it makes you believe in the American dream. And so I think a lot of people were hoping that he would do it. I think it would have done an awful lot for the racial divisions in the country as well. But one of the problems with Colin Powell is no one knows whether he can take a fastball under his chin as a political candidate. It's different being a general than it is being a political candidate in the rough and tumble of American politics.
Well, now let me pick up on this, because in the wake of his announcement, there was a lot of hand-wringing, not totally unjustified, but a lot of hand-wringing about, oh, once again, this harsh, ugly political climate has kept a good person from diving in. Now, Powell himself, asked about that by Sam Donaldson, said, no, that's not what it's all about. And in fact, I think the run for president should be rugged and down and dirty, and you should have to survive the test by fire. I agree with the general, not with the hand-wringers. How about you?
Well, I think we've taken it to a new level, and it's not up in my judgment. The other thing is we spent far too much time on people's personal lives. If Ike announced today he was running for president, we'd have 3 weeks.
Kay Summersby
Yeah,
the
Kay
next
Summersby
day, right.
would be all over the thing the next day. And whatever happened between Ike and Kay Summersby is her business, his and Mamie's, and I don't think anybody else's. But we would be hearing about it for 3 weeks. I mean, it's not, you know, how did you run the battalion? What about this report? What about the decisions in the war? I think all of those things are fair, but sort of his wife, what medication she's on, all of that stuff. You know, he invested in something that O.J. Simpson are. You know, please.
Yeah, but this is where he gets, there's this kind of scrutiny from the press that shows us how mature an adult a candidate is. Colin Powell, more than anyone else, probably could have said, look, I'm not going to discuss that. You shouldn't be asking me. That's irrelevant. Let's talk about something real. And people would have applauded. So he could have used that general concept now that the media's gone too far with the personal life to rise above it and even further exacerbate his image as an adult, and that would have worked for him. But how do you run for president if your wife doesn't really want to do it? I think that's probably an even bigger problem.
But getting back to this issue of the climate, you two give, I think, a sane analysis. But a lot of people, when they talk about the climate, for instance, talk about whitewater, that somehow all the questions about whitewater are part of this ugly, nasty climate. And I think, if anything, the media has been too soft on presidential candidates.
Right.
Unwilling to probe a Michael Dukakis, a George Bush, a Bill Clinton before they're elected and come out with pertinent facts.
It's because I think whitewater would have been a real issue to talk about. It goes to what kind of governor Bill Clinton was. I think that's fair. And I think Governor Clinton should have had to respond to that. And now President Clinton has to. But the problem is people spend more time in what kind of skirt was he chasing, or, you know, I mean, for anyone who's been in a government office, particularly an administrator, there are enough things to go over in terms of decisions. For legislators, there are enough votes to go over, and you know, there are real issues that you can get to there.
Well,
and I think our media
something
spends
about their character too, Peter.
But I think we spend far too much time. Yeah, if you don't get it out of where they've been in government, but I think we spend far too much time on personal lives, on what happened to their kids, and you know, when Geraldine Ferraro was running, the people were doing stories on her father being arrested for not wearing a tank top at the beach in the summer in the early part of this century. I mean, come on.
I agree with you. I think you can draw the information you need about character just from their public performance.
Or the way they respond to these accusations.
Yeah.
I didn't care if Clinton was chasing skirts, but I wanted to find out if he'd lied to me when he was accused of it.
Well, now
That
we
was
know the
important.
answer to that. He'll lie about anything at any time. Who benefits from Powell's withdrawal, if anyone?
if the Republican candidate has half a brain, he will immediately announce that Colin Powell is going to be the Secretary of State and bring him into the campaign. Very much the same way that Weld brought Lucia into his campaign and ran as a team. What would be wrong with doing that? Announce your cabinet ahead of time, someone that popular.
You've got to get him to say yes.
Campaigning. Well, he sort of implied that he wouldn't mind doing something to serve and that he is going to be a Republican. He has changed his party, right? As he said he was going to definitely be working with Republicans. So why not have him as part of the ticket, even if he doesn't want to be a candidate that has to run for the office?
People who benefited the champagne merchants in Washington, D.C. Every one of the Republican candidates thinks they're now in the race, and Bill Clinton, who had to have celebrated in whatever fashion he does it.
Well, watching him pull out, or he was never in, but declined to run, I thought of Ross Perot's withdrawal in July of 1992 from the presidential race. Of course, we all know he jumped back in later, but if you recall at the time, he pulled out and said, the Democratic Party is revitalized. It, in hindsight, shows you how clear-thinking old Ross is. He said, the Democratic Party is revitalized, my candidacy isn't really needed any longer, and the next day, the Clinton-Gore ticket bumped up about 10, 15 points in the polls. This time around, Colin Powell says he's not going to run and says, for the first time, I'm a Republican. I thought that was, after the news headline of he's not running, the most significant
But he said it in the book. He wrote it in the book. It was clear he was a Republican. I mean, I think it was clear to everybody who had followed him that this man was a Republican. And it's interesting to see, one of the things he talked about at the press conference last week was the whole business of how much money the government spends and things like this. I don't think he's a Republican because, well, what the heck, George Bush appointed me, or I made these moves in the Reagan administration. I think he really is a Republican. The book reflected that. He doesn't agree with the Republican platform or the Republican contract of a year ago in toto. Very few people do. But I don't think people are that surprised that he's a Republican.
He said that the Medicaid, Medicare, and budgetary reform that the Congress is pursuing, the Republicans are pursuing, is, quote, essential. Doesn't that, down the road, have some significance? I mean, I think, I hope it's clear what I'm saying here, that I think ultimately it's the Republicans who, if they don't blow it, can capitalize on the fact that this guy is part of their crowd and is, not without some reservations, endorsing their ideas.
He should be part of their campaign.
I mean, Bob Dole, I mean, it's put up or shut up time. He's got to find a way to tap into what it is that Powell evoked.
I think if Bob Dole wins the nomination, you might see him have a discussion with Powell about and I mean a very public discussion about the vice presidency. And if Powell turns him down, he turns him down. He says he's eliminated all thought of it for this time. I don't know that he really has.
All right, let's move on because I wanted to get to the results of the municipal elections last Tuesday here in Massachusetts, where casino gambling had a lousy day. Chicopee, Springfield, Lawrence, and Methuen all voted no on casino gambling. New Bedford did vote yes, and some pro-casino candidates did have a successful day, although one narrowly in New Bedford and Springfield. Is this a turning point of any kind for casino gambling? Is the public sending a message to the politicians, you've been going way too fast, back off? Barbara?
I think it's a perfect example of how you ask the voters for something and you do what they want. People in New Bedford want a casino. That's perfect. You've got public support for it. Put it in New Bedford, which is what everyone's talking about in the first place. The other cities don't want it. They don't want it. That's fine, too. You can't have it in every city, or it doesn't work.
I'm not as enamored of ballot questions as Barbara is. And I think they do serve a purpose, and I think she's absolutely on the money. This is an example of a place in time where they do serve a purpose. I think it would be a mistake to put a gambling casino any place without going to the voters directly and asking them. And what you have in the case is the beauty of democracy. I mean, New Bedford says yes, and they've really thought about it, and it's not a whimsical move. It's been seriously discussed and thought about among leaders in New Bedford for a long time. And I think the rest of the state has said, hey, I'm not that interested. There are very few places where I think gambling has worked correctly. I was visiting the Vicksburg battlefield, and there's gambling all up the Mississippi River. And there are some sites, you know, we'll hawk your car. I mean, you look at that and you say to yourself, geez, you know, who's doing what here? You walk in and see money machines as the first thing in the casino, and you say, people can borrow money at 18% to go, wow. I'm not sure it's worked all that well, although Foxwoods, I've been there twice. They have done a very nice job of making that work.
Yeah, Foxwoods is also a rip-off. I mean, I've never...
Well, the house wins always.
The house wins always. They've got about 15 different gimmick bets you can place on a single hand of blackjack. It's a giant vacuum cleaner sucking money by and large out of the pockets of people who probably shouldn't be spending it. I think political careers are going to be ruined by the New Bedford
Oh, wait,
Casino.
I thought you were going to say it's a giant vacuum sucking money out of Massachusetts, sending it to Connecticut, because that's the whole point here. People are going to gamble, and therefore, why don't they gamble in New Bedford so that the state at least takes in its own revenue from its own people?
Well, I got to tell you something. I don't know that Foxwood has a nice setup already, and I think some people who gamble might go to New Bedford depending on what they have. The giant step that Foxwood has ahead of New Bedford is going to be an incredible advantage that they have, and they also have a lot of money in the bank, so they can change the odds on how much they give out in winnings and all those kinds of things. I'm not saying there's a reason not to do it in New Bedford, but it's going to be tough to siphon off a lot of bettors from Foxwood to New Bedford.
We have under a minute, but I would like to get a quick response from you. Do either of you think for a moment that there will be broad-based economic benefits to the people of the New Bedford area from the casino there?
I don't.
Barbara?
I don't know enough about it. If the people in New Bedford think so, then the casino should go where they want it to go.
One of the things, by the way, it may be an issue in the Senate race. Jon Keller may bring it back to Bill Weld, who wanted to put gambling operations in the Charles River.
Well, Kerry's signed on the dotted. He's behind the New Bedford Casino, is he not?
I don't. I know Barney Frank is strongly in favor of it. I
think
don't
Kerry